All right, Ammar Barghouty is with the Sufan Center, which is an independent research and analysis center, and he heads up cyber practice, and he joins us from Doha, Qatar. Hi.
Hi, Dana.
So your background's pretty amazing, and so I want to mention it before we talk about all this, if you don't mind. But
No problem.
you worked in the FBI field since 1999. You were a field agent. You were posted all over the world on counterterrorism missions. In 2013, you were assigned to the Washington Field Office of Cyber Human Intelligence, spotting, assessing, recruiting of confidential human sources in the cyber arena. And you were also program manager responsible for computer intrusion threats from terror organizations and ran cyber intrusion investigations across several FBI offices. That's really impressive. And I want to ask you to begin with, I mean, Ammar, given everything that we're seeing in pipeline hacking, the massive hacking of the US government systems in December, which was called SolarWinds, it would seem that we're in a cyber war right now.
Well, I don't think we've ever not been in a cyber war, but it's just the intensity is definitely gone up.
And we seem to be on the losing side of that war because we failed to secure even all our critical infrastructure, and month by month and increasingly week by week, we seem to be so vulnerable.
Yeah. Well, I think we seem to be more on the losing side. One of the big reasons is we have the largest surface area to attack. We're a very connected country. But you're right, in terms of the security, if you look at just the Colonial Pipeline, just some basic cyber hygiene probably would have mitigated a lot of that, a lot of what happened there. As it's understood, the attackers came in using a reused password that was compromised on another site. And Colonial Pipeline wasn't employing what we call multi-factor authentication, which really should be the standard for everything. You know, when you log into your bank and you receive a text message on your phone to continue the login process. So if somebody stole what you knew, your password, they still had to have something that you had, which is your telephone or your token, and that would have probably prevented even that attack from ever happening.
Cyber hygiene, that's a new one for me.
Mm-hmm. It's used a lot now.
But I mean, this seems crazy that you get into, if you're a hacker, you can get into major infrastructure by compromising somebody's password. I mean, surely there are more layers to this than a password.
Well, to be quite honest, a lot of what the hacking is, I mean, we look at, if we're looking at the nation state type hacking or stuff that NSA would probably do, that involves a lot of technical knowledge and a lot of really, really strong savvy to do, when sometimes it's just easy to get somebody's password. It's way easier. If you can social engineer it out of somebody with a phone call or a spoofed email, you make them divulge that information, they open the door for you. And unfortunately, that's kind of how a lot of this works, because why should I do all the engineering, and if somebody discovers it, they can always patch it, when it's a lot easier to get somebody to open the door for me. And a lot of these hacks actually are done that way. Ransomware in particular right now.
The Russians seem to do this as an industry. I mean, what would you say about the accuracy of reports that come not only from the FBI, but the NSA and many others, that, first of all, that the election was hacked, and that GRU, Russian military intelligence, was involved in things like SolarWinds?
Well, in terms of the actual election hacking, I haven't seen anything where it was kind of a technical type hacking versus retrieving the emails of, back in 2016 of the DNC and the whatnot. That didn't need a lot of savvy to do. That was also social engineering. I believe John Podesta's emails, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, was stolen via spoofed email where he tried to verify his Google credentials. But in terms of Russia and the criminal side of things, especially with the ransomware attacks, which is something that we're really being overwhelmed with right now, and the tolerance of the criminals within Russia, I've always seen that the line between probably organized crime or even crime in Russia and the Russian state is pretty blurry, and it's not a very solid or clearly delineated line. A lot of
But
tolerance there.
that's great for denial purposes from the Kremlin, because they can say, oh, they're
Absolutely.
criminals. It wasn't military intelligence, or it wasn't the FSB, or et cetera.
Absolutely. And that's where also using these lower technology techniques comes in, because if you're using something really high level, something, what we call, if you're coming in with what we call 0-day exploits, basically you find a vulnerability in a system that nobody else knows about. These, we call them 0 days, where different systems, your antiviruses can't pick them up or anything else like that. You kind of associate those with very high level type hacker activity, or even nation state side. But if you want to kind of deny things, you kind of keep it on the lower level, and it works great. There's really, again, like I said, there's no reason to employ the crown jewels of your technical exploits when somebody could, again, just trick somebody into giving you a password, or using, again, a reused password across different platforms. I can compromise a password on one system, and if I know who the user is, and they work where in a place that I'm targeting, I could just reuse that, because a lot of folks do reuse it. And again, if we're not using our multi-factor authentication, our text messages or tokens to come in, you're in the system.
I mean, this is all a form of hybrid warfare as well, in this kind of look surprised, act concerned, and deny everything.
Absolutely.
So do you believe Putin's denials that Russia is doing this? I mean, if you watched the summit last week with President Biden, President Putin's news conference dealt extensively with the whole area of cyber hacking. And he says more hacks are coming from America and places like that than from Russia. And of course, he denied it came from the government.
Well, it's kind of funny. Sometimes if you look at certain kind of maps that show where a lot of cyber attacks are launched, they may appear to be launched in America, but you can make it look like they're launched from America. So I think he's kind of using maybe that as a cover, but no, I absolutely do not believe his denials one bit.
So you believe that the security services are doing some of it, not all of it?
I wouldn't say some, but I would say they're looking on and maybe, cheering.
Organizing?
I have nothing to base whether they're actually organizing it or not.
But that's been the evidence that's been given to Congress, and that some of the organizations of GRU are absolutely involved in the 2016 election. That these weren't fringe criminals. I mean, that these were intelligence services.
When we're looking at the 2016 elections, I kind of look at that as a separate thing versus, again, a lot of the criminal activity that's going on right now. Again, Colonial Pipeline and the whatnot. The 2016 elections, no, from all the evidence, it truly appears that it was directed, supported. The name escapes me. The actual physical location of where these folks were housed was all tied back, I believe, to the Russian government.
But some of them may have been from St. Petersburg and elsewhere, but I think there are a number of them. Yeah,
the Internet Research Center, I believe, is what it was called. Was the name of the place. Yeah. But also a lot of the disinformation was kind of coming out of there, which is not necessarily my expertise. I'm more on the intrusion side and
when you were looking at intrusion threats from terror organizations, what kind of threats?
On a level, I would call the medium low to low. A lot of the terror organizations really, if you take an organization like Al Qaeda, they really distrusted technology. So they had one or two very promising folks there that were kind of shoved to the wayside. ISIS kind of had a lot more technically savvy cadre, but they employed most of those internally to search for spies using basically compromising people's phones. Same thing to look at Iraqi or coalition troop movement by, tricking soldiers to download apps that let them access their location in video and microphone going on. In terms of like attacking the West, it was very aspirational, and they did look at I believe like a water system at one point, but they kind of lack I'm going to say the the expertise on one side, like even if they got into the water system, they don't have the engineer who knows, okay, which valves do you turn now to make this thing go bad? They didn't have that expertise. And a lot of the really aspiring, as I want to call them, thought leaders were killed before they ever had a good chance of getting somewhere. Others, in terms of doing intrusions, were mostly sympathizers, indirectly tied to folks like ISIS. They tried a lot. They made a lot of mistakes, and a lot of them were caught by a lot of good international cooperation between the United States and friendly governments.
I mean, I asked the question because if we're vulnerable to criminals, which we surely are we not vulnerable to something more than just ransomware? We're vulnerable possibly to terrorists.
It's definitely a possibility. Right now, currently, I think that the threat isn't as high as it used to be. There was a lot of attrition that happened in terms of the technically savvy ranks that were even thought about doing these types of operations. But when we look at ransomware, here's something that I've always said is kind of it's kind of been my fear, that terrorists kind of use techniques that are a few years old, but now with ransomwares kind of getting there. What happens when a designated terrorist organization takes down a city's system and demands money, and then now the city would become funding terrorism if they pay the ransom or they lose all their files? That's kind of an interesting conundrum at that point.
I mean, the CyberWinds attack was 18,000. I mean, I've had to, I read that number again and again. 18,000 organizations, including the U.S. Treasury.
Yes, yeah. That was definitely closer to the nation state level type of attack. And
how do we stop it? And don't tell me to change my password.
Well, it's going back to the cyber hygiene. So I believe that the issue with CyberWinds was they had their updates placed in a location that was compromised, and then the adversaries were able to slip their own software in lieu of the updates. And as people updated their systems, they were bringing in the bad code, so to speak. There's ways, absolute ways to do it. And again, it's all just really good habits that need to be developed, especially on things that are sensitive. When CyberWinds, for instance, would put up their updates, they need to also include, and I believe they might have, what we call a hash value. So when I download the update, I will check the hash value of the software that I have against the hash value that CyberWinds says this is what it's supposed to be. And if they don't match, that means somebody kind of tinkered with the software. It takes a little bit of extra time, and some people, and I'll admit it myself, I've downloaded stuff just for my own personal use where the website would have a hash value, and I've been lazy. I just haven't checked what I downloaded versus the hash value that was there, but I'm not, that important with the things that I was doing.
So it occurs to me that what we're dealing with in American society and a lot of Western societies are probably traditionally what would say in Russia would be government organizations, long ago have been privatized. And you're trying to preach security to civilian organizations and hoping that they get it.
Yes. And a lot of them don't see, and it's unfortunate because, a lot of the organizations, businesses, they're primarily looking at the bottom line and the business processes. And if you ask them to do things, they don't see the return on the investment. It's like buying insurance. You really don't see it until you need it, and you hope you never need it. But a business might see that kind of as an expense. For example, one big nation state, the attack was the WannaCry attack back in 2017. And that was based on actually the leaked NSA hacking tools that was re-weaponized by what the United States and the United Kingdom believe is North Korea. And that spread like wildfire to over 200,000 systems. Luckily, a kill switch was found in it.